The sun bled across the baked earth as Kai dismounted. Redemption wasn't a town, not really. More like a scab on the hide of Arizona territory. He hadn't seen a welcome sign, but the glares from the porch of the mercantile spoke volumes. His daughter, Tala, coughed, a dry rattling sound that hitched in Kai's chest. He tightened his grip on the reins, the leather worn smooth by years of use. Had walked 2 days, his moccasins worn thin, just to reach this collection of sun-bleached lies. He needed milk. Tala needed milk. The woman behind the counter, Martha, watched him approach. Her eyes, the color of faded denim, narrowed. She clutched a worn rosary in her hand. Kai knew the look. Had seen it before, etched on the faces of soldiers, ranchers, and even some missionaries. Fear mixed with disdain. He spoke in broken English, each word a stone dragged from a dry riverbed. Milk, doc, for a child. Sick. Martha didn't flinch, didn't offer a word comfort. We don't serve your kind here. Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth. A man, big as a bull, leaned against the counter, picking his teeth with a Bowie knife. He chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding. Maybe you should try asking the cows, Redskin. Kai ignored him. He focused on Martha, his face an impassive mask. Inside, though, the embers of rage flickered. Rage at the injustice, at the suffering he couldn't shield his daughter from. He pulled a small pouch from his belt. Inside were a few silver coins, remnants of a trade long past. He placed them on the counter, the dull clink echoing in the silence. Fair price. Martha's eyes flickered to the coins, then back to Kai's face. The rosary beads clicked faster. She hesitated. The big man spat on the floor. Don't you dare, Martha, he growled. We ain't selling nothing to no savage. Martha's gaze darted between the coins and the menacing figure. Kai simply stood there, a statue carved from the desert itself, his dark eyes unwavering. Tala coughed again, a sound that cut through the tension like a shard of glass. Then, a different sound, a gentle clink of glass. From the back of the store, a young woman emerged. Tala, Dot. She held a glass of milk, the white liquid gleaming in the dim light. Her hair, the color of spun gold, was pulled back tight, revealing a face weathered beyond its years. Scars, both visible and hidden, clung to her like shadows. She walked past Martha and the hulking man, her movements deliberate, unafraid. She stopped in front of Kai, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear in them, only a quiet understanding. Here, she said, her voice soft, barely a whisper. For the child. Kai hesitated. He didn't trust easily. Too much had been taken from him. But he saw the genuine concern in Sarah's eyes, the echo of his own desperation. He nodded once, a slight inclination of his head. He knelt down, offering the glass to Tala. Her small hands trembled as she grasped it. She drank slowly, greedily, the milk dribbling down her chin. Her coughing subsided, replaced by a sigh of relief. Martha sputtered, Sarah, what do you think you're doing? He can pay if he wants it. The big man stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his side. You listen to your ma, girl. You got no business helping these. Sarah didn't flinch. She faced the man, her chin lifted. He offered to pay. And the child is sick. Last I checked, kindness ain't a crime in redemption. A ripple of unease passed through the store. Sarah was an outsider, just like Kai, though for different reasons. Whispers followed her, accusations of a shadowed past she couldn't outrun. But in that moment, She stood tall, a beacon of unexpected grace in a town consumed by prejudice. Kai watched Sarah, a flicker of something akin to hope igniting in his eyes. He saw in her a strength he recognized, the will to survive against impossible odds. He didn't know her story, but he knew she understood his. When Tala finished the milk, Kai offered the empty glass back to Sarah. He didn't speak, but his eyes conveyed a gratitude that transcended words. Sarah took the glass, her fingers brushing against his. A faint spark, barely perceptible, passed between them. A silent promise of understanding, of shared hardship, in a land that offered little solace. The big man, Silas, spat again, the brown juice landing dangerously close to Sarah's boots. Kindness? That's what you call coddling a savage. Hell steal you blind, girl. Mark my words. Martha wrung her hands, her gaze flitting nervously between Silas, Kai, and her daughter. Sarah, please, don't make trouble. We've got enough as it is. Sarah ignored them, her attention fixed on Kai. She saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his hand instinctively moved towards the knife sheathed at his hip. He was a coiled spring, ready to unleash. She knew that look, knew the burden of constant vigilance. He's done nothing wrong, she said, her voice gaining strength. He paid for the milk. Now, if you'll excuse us. She turned, ushering Kai and Tala towards the door. Silas blocked their path, his eyes narrowed into slits. Not so fast, squaw lover, he sneered. You think you can just waltz in here, get handouts, and then leave? You owe us something, Redskin, for the trouble you caused. Kai remained silent, his face an unreadable mask. He lowered Tala gently to the ground, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. The air crackled with tension. Sarah stepped between them, her small frame defiant. He owes you nothing. Now, get out of our way. Silas chuckled, a low, menacing rumble. Oh, what, little missy? You gonna sick your Indian friend on me? He reached out, grabbing Sarah's arm. His grip was tight, painful. Let her go, Kai said, his voice low and dangerous. It was the first time he had spoken directly to Silas, and the effect was immediate. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silas tightened his grip, a cruel smile spreading across his face. What's a savage gonna do? Scalp me? Before Kai could react, Sarah kicked out, her boot connecting with Silas' shin. He yelped in pain, releasing her arm. She stumbled back, rubbing her wrist. Get out, she hissed, her eyes blazing. Get out before I call the sheriff. Silas glared at them, his face flushed with anger. He knew Sarah was bluffing. The sheriff wouldn't lift a finger to help a squaw lover and an Indian. But he also knew that Kai was a dangerous man, a man who wouldn't hesitate to defend himself and his child. He spat on the floor one last time, the gob of phlegm landing inches from Tala's feet. This ain't over, girl. You made an enemy today. He turned and stormed out of the mercantile, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken threats. Martha wrung her hands, her face pale. Sarah, why do you do this? You're just asking for trouble. Sarah looked at Kai, then at Tala, who was clinging to her father's leg, her eyes wide with fear. She knew Martha was right. She was inviting trouble, but she couldn't stand by and watch injustice prevail. Not anymore. Someone has to, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Someone has to. Kai nodded once, his eyes conveying a silent understanding. He knew that Sarah had risked everything for him and his daughter. He would not forget her kindness. He led Tala out of the mercantile, leaving Sarah alone with her fears and the disapproving gaze of her mother. The sun beat down on redemption, a harsh reminder of the unforgiving landscape and the even more unforgiving hearts. Kai led Tala away from the mercantile, the dust swirling around their worn moccasins. Each step was a fresh humiliation. He hadn't begged for anything in years. Not since they burned his village. He found a meager patch of shade beneath a skeletal cottonwood on the outskirts of redemption. He sat Tala down, his gaze sweeping the horizon. The vast expanse of Arizona territory offered little comfort. It was a land that swallowed men whole, a land where the bones of broken promises lay bleaching under the relentless sun. He pulled a piece of dry jerky from his pouch, offering it to Tala. She took it without a word, her eyes still wide with the fear she had witnessed in the mercantile. He watched her chew, her small jaw working methodically. Had promised her safety, a life free from the hatred that had consumed his own. But here he was, forced to rely on the very people who had taken everything from him. The milk had eased her cough, but the fever still burned in her cheeks. He needed more than kindness. He needed medicine, shelter, and he needed to find a way to protect her from the likes of Silas and the simmering prejudice that festered in redemption. He closed his eyes, the images flashing behind his lids. The burning wiki-ups, the screams of his people, the faces of the soldiers, their eyes cold and devoid of mercy. He had fought them, fiercely, desperately, but they were too many, too strong. Had been forced to flee, to abandon his ancestral lands, to become a ghost in the land of his fathers. Now, he was reduced to this, begging for milk for his daughter, relying on the charity of a woman who was herself an outcast. A bitter taste rose in his throat. Had sworn he would never submit, never bow to the white man's world. But Tala was all that mattered. He opened his eyes, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and blood red. He saw Sarah standing in the doorway of the mercantile, watching them. Her figure was silhouetted against the lamplight, a solitary beacon in the gathering darkness. He wondered about her. What had brought her to this desolate place? What shadows did she carry within her heart? He sensed a kindred spirit, a soul wounded by the same harsh realities of the West. But he also knew that trust was a dangerous commodity, easily broken. He glanced at Tala, her eyes now closed, her breathing shallow. He had to make a decision. Stay in redemption, risk exposing her to the hatred that lurked beneath the surface? Or move on, seek refuge elsewhere, knowing that her chances of survival dwindled with each passing day? He didn't know the answer. All he knew was that he would do whatever it took to protect his daughter, even if it meant swallowing his pride, even if it meant relying on the kindness of strangers in a land that offered little kindness at all. The weight of that responsibility settled heavy on his shoulders, a burden he would carry until his dying breath. The West demanded its pound of flesh, and Kai knew, sooner or later, it would collect. The next morning dawned hot and unforgiving, baking the dust of redemption into a fine powder that coated everything. Sarah woke with a knot in her stomach. Silas' parting words echoed in her mind, a chilling promise of retribution. She knew he wouldn't let it go. He was the kind of man who thrived on spite, who measured his worth by the misery he inflicted on others. She found Martha already at work, kneading dough for the day's bread. Her mother's face was etched with worry. "You should have kept your nose out of it, Sarah," she said, her voice tight. "Silas has Jedediah in his pocket. You know what that means." Jedediah Thorntonko. The name hung in the air like a threat. He owned half the land in redemption, and most of the people too, in one way or another. A man with a reputation for ruthlessness, a man who didn't take kindly to dissent. "I couldn't just stand there and do nothing," Sarah replied, her voice low. "And what good did it do? Now you've made an enemy of Jedediah. He'll make our lives miserable." Martha slammed the dough onto the counter, the sound like a gunshot in the small kitchen. Sarah knew her mother was right. She had put them both in danger. But she couldn't regret her actions. Not when she saw the fear in Tala's eyes, the desperation in Kai's. Later that morning, a group of men gathered outside the mercantile. Silas was among them, his face still bruised from Sarah's kick. They were talking in hushed tones, their eyes fixed on Kai and Tala, who were sitting quietly in the shade of the cottonwood tree. Sarah watched from the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw Jedediah ride into town, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the gathered men. He dismounted, his spurs jingling as he approached the group. Silas pointed towards Kai and Tala. Jedediah nodded, his face grim. The lines were being drawn. The town was dividing itself, some whispering their support for Sarah's compassion, others aligning themselves with Jedediah's cold brand of justice. Redemption was about to learn what it truly stood for. The whispers started, venomous and quiet, traveling through the dusty streets like a prairie fire. Squaw lover, some hissed, their words aimed at Sarah. Others focused on Kai, calling him a savage, a thief, a threat to their way of life. The air grew thick with prejudice, and Sarah knew that the fragile peace she had briefly created was about to shatter. Sarah watched Jedediah approach Kai and Tala, her stomach twisting with dread. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes hard and gray like river stones, assessing them with a chilling indifference. He didn't speak, just stood there, a silent declaration of power. Silas stepped forward, a sneer twisting his lips. Jedediah, this here's the Injun I was telling you about. Cause trouble in my store, disrespecting decent folk. Jedediah finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that carried across the dusty street. You got something to say for yourself, Redskin? Kai remained silent, his gaze fixed on Jedediah's face. He didn't flinch, didn't cower. He simply met the man's gaze, a silent defiance that spoke volumes. Tala clung to his leg, her small body trembling. Sarah couldn't stand it any longer. She pushed open the door of the mercantile and walked towards them, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was walking into a hornet's nest, but she couldn't stand by and watch Kai and Tala be subjected to this humiliation. Leave them alone, Jedediah, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. They've done nothing wrong. Jedediah turned his gaze on her, his eyes narrowing. Mind your own business, Sarah. This ain't your fight. It is my business, she retorted, her voice gaining strength. They're in my town, and I won't stand by and watch them be harassed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They were used to seeing Sarah quiet and reserved, a woman who kept to herself. This display of defiance was unexpected, unsettling. Silas chuckled, a cruel sound that grated on Sarah's nerves. Looks like little Missy's got a soft spot for savages. Jedediah raised a hand, silencing Silas. He looked at Sarah, his expression unreadable. You understand what you're doing, girl. You're siding with them against your own people. They are people, Sarah said, her voice ringing with conviction. And they deserve to be treated with respect. Jedediah stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. He seemed to be trying to gauge her resolve, to determine whether she was truly committed to her cause. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold and hard. All right, Sarah. You want to take up for them. You take responsibility for them. You vouch for them. If they cause any trouble, it's on your head. Sarah swallowed hard, but she didn't back down. I understand, she said, her voice firm. I vouch for them. Jedediah nodded, his face still grim. Find out he's stuck, and me's all. But don't come crying to me when they betray you. He turned and walked away, the crowd parting to make way for him. Silas and the other men followed, their eyes lingering on Sarah with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. Sarah turned to Kai and Tala, her heart heavy with the weight of her promise. She had just drawn a line in the sand, a line that would undoubtedly have consequences. But she had done what she believed was right. She had offered them a promise of protection, a small shield against the storm of prejudice that threatened to engulf them. Now, she had to find a way to keep that promise, even if it meant risking everything. The dust settled, but the tension hung thick in the air, a palpable thing Sarah could almost taste. Jedediah's words were a gauntlet thrown, a test of her resolve, and a threat. She had pledged her word, a dangerous currency in redemption. Kai watched her, his expression unreadable. Tala, still clinging to his leg, looked up at Sarah with wide, trusting eyes. Sarah knelt, offering Tala a small, hesitant smile. "It'll be all right," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. That evening, under the cloak of a bruised purple sunset, Jedediah met with Silas and two other men, Boone, a wiry, mean-eyed tracker, and a hulking brute named Clem. They gathered in the back room of the saloon, the air thick with stale beer and unspoken malice. "The engine needs to go," Jedediah said, his voice low and gravelly. "He's a spark that could ignite the whole damn territory." Silas, still nursing a bruised jaw, nodded eagerly. "As Apache, Jedediah turned. You know what they are." Jedediah's eyes narrowed. He knew all too well. Years ago, Apaches had raided his ranch, killing his wife and son. The hatred burned in him, a constant gnawing fire. Well, make it look like he stole something. Something valuable. Something that'll get him hanged. Boone, the tracker, spoke up, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "There's a shipment of gold coming through next week, headed for the assay office in Tucson. We could say he tried to rob it." Jedediah considered this, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Perfect. Well, plant the evidence. Make sure it's airtight. And make sure Sarah sees it. Let her precious savage pay the price for her foolishness." He paused, his gaze hardening. "And Boone, I want you to track him. Learn his ways, his habits. Find a weakness. Everyone has one." Clem, the brute, just grunted, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. He was a man who enjoyed inflicting pain, and the thought of hurting Kai, of breaking his spirit, filled him with a dark anticipation. Jedediah leaned back in his chair, the plan forming in his mind, a web of deceit and violence that would ensnare Kai and break Sarah's defiant spirit. He would show her that the West had no place for sentimentality, no room for compassion. It was a land ruled by strength, by fear, and by the unwavering pursuit of self-interest. And he, Jedediah Thorne, was its ruthless king. The gold shipment. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. Jedediah's words echoed in her head. "If they cause any trouble, it's on your head." Trouble was brewing. She could smell it in the dust-laden air, see it in the furtive glances cast Kai's way. That night, sleep offered no escape. Sarah tossed and turned, haunted by visions of Jedediah's cold eyes and the simmering hatred in Silas. She knew they wouldn't let it go. Kai and Tala were outsiders, vulnerable, and she had foolishly made herself their protector. Just before dawn, a frantic pounding on her door jolted her awake. It was Martha, her face pale with terror. "They're here, Sarah. They're saying Kai stole from the stage. They're going to hang him." Sarah's blood ran cold. She threw on her clothes, her mind racing. This was it. Jedediah's trap had sprung. She burst out of the mercantile, and the scene that greeted her was a nightmare made real. A makeshift gallows had been erected in the center of town, the rough-hewn timber stark against the rising sun. A jeering crowd surrounded Kai, his hands bound, his face bruised. Silas was there, of course, his eyes burning with vindictive glee. Jedediah stood nearby, his expression a mask of grim satisfaction. "He's a thief. A liar. He deserves to hang," Silas shouted, whipping the crowd into a frenzy. Sarah pushed her way through the mob, her voice rising above the din. "He didn't do it. It's a lie. You can't just hang him without proof." Jedediah stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "We found the gold in his possession, Sarah. Enough proof for me." Sarah looked at Kai, searching his eyes for any sign of guilt. He met her gaze, his expression unwavering. He didn't say a word, but his silence spoke volumes. She knew he was innocent. "Where's Tala?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. "She's safe," Jedediah said, his voice devoid of emotion. "For now, no." Sarah knew what he meant. Tala was leverage, a bargaining chip. They would use her to control Kai, to ensure his silence. There was no time to argue, no time to plead. The mob was growing restless, their bloodlust rising with the sun. Sarah knew that if she didn't act fast, Kai would be dead. "Take him," she yelled, turning to Kai. "Run and don't look back." The crowd surged forward, but Sarah stood her ground, blocking their path. She pulled a pistol from her skirt, the cold steel a stark reminder of the violence that lay beneath the surface of redemption. "Get out of the way, Sarah," Jedediah said, his voice dangerously low. "Don't make me hurt you." "I won't let you kill him," Sarah replied, her voice trembling but firm. For a moment, they stood locked in a silent standoff, the fate of Kai hanging in the balance. Then, with a sudden burst of strength, Kai broke free from his captors and bolted, disappearing into the maze of buildings and alleyways that lined the town's main street. The chase was on. Jedediah roared, a sound of pure fury. "After him! Get him!" The mob surged, a wave of angry men crashing against Sarah's fragile defense. She fired a shot into the air, hoping to buy Kai some time, but it only fueled their rage. She was shoved aside, knocked to the ground, the pistol flying from her hand. As she scrambled to her feet, she saw Clem bearing down on her, his face twisted into a cruel grin. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "You're going to regret this, little missy." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the crowd, a silent shadow moving with surprising speed. It was the rancher. He hadn't spoken a word, hadn't even seemed to notice the commotion. But now he stood between Clem and Sarah, his eyes like chips of flint. He didn't say a word, just looked at Clem. Clem, a man who feared nothing, hesitated. There was something in the rancher's gaze, a coldness, a quiet menace that gave him pause. The rancher reached out, his hand closing around Clem's wrist. He squeezed, slowly, deliberately. Clem's face contorted in pain. He tried to pull away, but the rancher's grip was unyielding. Finally, with a grunt of exertion, the rancher twisted Clem's arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. "Get out of here," the rancher said, his voice a low growl. Clem, humiliated and in pain, scrambled away, disappearing into the crowd. The rancher turned to Sarah, his expression unreadable. He offered her a hand, and she took it, surprised by the strength in his callous fingers. He helped her to her feet, then turned and walked away, disappearing as silently as he had arrived. Sarah watched him go, a sense of gratitude washing over her. She didn't know who he was, but she knew she owed him a debt. But there was no time to dwell on it. Cowboy was still out there, running for his life. She had to find him, had to help him escape. Ignoring the jeers and taunts of the remaining crowd, she ran in the direction Kai had fled, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She knew the risks. Jedediah would be hunting them both now. But she couldn't abandon Kai. She had given her word. She found him hiding in an abandoned stable on the outskirts of town, Tala clinging to him like a shadow. They were both exhausted, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. "We have to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "They'll be looking for us." Kai nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "Where do we go?" Sarah hesitated. She had no plan, no destination. All she knew was that they had to leave redemption behind. "West," she said, her voice firm. "We head west." And so, under the cover of darkness, they slipped out of redemption. 3 fugitives bound together by circumstance and a shared desire for freedom. They had nothing but the clothes on their backs, a few meager supplies, and the unwavering belief that somewhere, beyond the horizon, there was a place where they could be safe. The desert tested them. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the earth and sucking the moisture from their bodies. Water was scarce, food even scarcer. Sarah, used to the comforts of town, struggled with the harsh conditions. But Kai, raised in the unforgiving landscape of the Apache territory, knew how to survive. He taught her how to find water in the dry creek beds, how to identify edible plants, how to track animals. He shared his knowledge. His quiet strength, a constant reassurance. Tala, despite her fear, adapted quickly, her small hands mimicking Kai's movements as she learned to gather firewood and track lizards. One evening, huddled around a small fire, Sarah found herself drawn to share her story. The crackling flames seemed to coax the words from her, each syllable a hesitant step into the light. "My husband, Thomas," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "He dreamed of building a life in redemption. A good life. He was a carpenter, a good one. But the drought, it took everything. Took him too, eventually. Pneumonia. Left me with nothing but debts." She looked down at her hands, calloused now from the journey. No longer the soft hands of a shopkeeper's wife. "Jedediah, he helped me, lent me money. But the interest, it was a trap. I was working just to pay him, never getting ahead." Kai listened without interrupting, his dark eyes filled with a deep understanding. He knew the sting of loss, the weight of injustice. He knew what it meant to be trapped. When Sarah finished, her voice choked with emotion, Kai remained silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and resonant. "My mother, she was Apache. My father, a white trapper. They lived in the mountains, away from the fighting. But the soldiers, they came. They burned our village, killed my mother. I was just a boy. I ran. I learned to survive." He touched the scar on his arm, a silent reminder of the violence he had endured. "Trust, it is a hard thing to give." Sarah looked at him, her heart aching for the pain he carried. "I understand," she said softly. "Trust has been a hard thing for me too." Tala, nestled between them, looked up at Kai, her small hand reaching out to touch his face. He smiled, a rare and precious sight, and gently stroked her hair. In that moment, something shifted between them. The shared stories, the vulnerability, the quiet understanding, it forged a bond stronger than any they had known before. They were no longer just strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were a family, bound by shared hardship and a glimmer of hope. As the fire died down, casting long shadows across the desert, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since Thomas' death. The West was still a dangerous place, full of uncertainty and hardship. But with Kai and Tala by her side, she knew she wasn't alone. And that, she realized, was a start. The fragile peace wouldn't last. 3 days out from redemption, Nestled in a narrow canyon, hoping to catch a rabbit for supper, the ambush came. Sarah heard the thunder of hooves first, then the crack of rifles echoing off the canyon walls. Yedidiah, Kai hissed, pushing Sarah and Tala behind a cluster of boulders. Get down! The canyon erupted in gunfire. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dust and chipping rock. Sarah peeked through a gap in the boulders and saw them, Jedediah and his men, silhouetted against the setting sun, their faces grim and determined. We know you're in there, Kai. Jedediah's voice boomed. Come out peacefully and maybe, just maybe, the woman and the girl won't get hurt. Sarah felt a surge of anger. Jedediah was using Tala as leverage, just as she'd feared. She glanced at Kai. His face was set, his eyes narrowed. He wouldn't surrender. Not to Jedediah. The gunfire intensified. Kai returned fire, his movements swift and precise. Had learned his deadly skill young, and every shot found its mark. Sarah watched, a mix of fear and awe churning inside her. She'd never seen anyone fight like that. Suddenly, Tala cried out. Sarah whirled around to see a trickle of blood running down the little girl's arm. A stray bullet had grazed her. "Ha! Ha!" Sarah cried, pulling her close. Kai cursed under his breath. We have to move. They'll pin us down here. He grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her towards a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. Can you make it? Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. She scooped Tala into her arms and followed Kai into the darkness. The crevice was barely wide enough to squeeze through, but it offered a sliver of protection from the relentless gunfire. They crawled through the darkness for what felt like an eternity, the sound of Jedediah's men echoing behind them. Finally, they emerged on the other side of the canyon, into a maze of jagged rocks and thorny brush. But Jedediah was relentless. He wouldn't let them escape that easily. As they stumbled through the brush, Sarah heard the sound of horses getting closer. They were being tracked. Then she saw him. A figure detached from Jedediah's main group. Silas Dotfrien. He was closer than the others, his eyes fixed on them with a predatory gleam. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Kai. Sarah knew what she had to do. She couldn't let Silas kill Kai. She had to protect him, protect Tala. Without thinking, she lunged forward, shoving Kai out of the way. The rifle cracked. Sarah felt a searing pain in her shoulder. She stumbled, falling to the ground. The world swam before her eyes. She looked up and saw Silas standing over her, his face twisted in a cruel smile. Got you now, little missy. But before he could fire again, Kai was on him, a whirlwind of fury. He tackled Silas to the ground, his fists flying. The two men grappled in the dirt, a desperate struggle for survival. Sarah watched, helpless, as Kai and Silas fought. She knew that if Kai lost, they were all doomed. Silas was bigger, heavier than Kai. But Kai fought with a ferocity born of desperation, fueled by the need to protect Tala. He landed a solid blow to Silas' jaw, sending him reeling. But Silas recovered quickly, grabbing Kai in a bear hug, squeezing the air from his lungs. Sarah knew Kai couldn't win this fight alone. She had to do something, anything, to help him. Ignoring the searing pain in her shoulder, she scrambled to her feet. She looked around for a weapon, anything she could use. Her eyes landed on a loose rock, about the size of her fist. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She grabbed it, her hand trembling. She crept up behind Silas, her heart pounding in her chest. She raised the rock high above her head, her arm aching. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, she brought it down on Silas' head. Silas grunted, his grip on Kai loosening. He staggered back, his hand reaching for his head. Kai seized the opportunity, breaking free from Salah's grasp. He punched Silas again, sending him crashing to the ground, unconscious. Kai rushed to Sarah's side, his face etched with concern. "Sarah, are you all right?" Sarah winced, clutching her shoulder. "It'll be fine. Just go. Take Tala and run. Get away from here." Kai hesitated. "I can't leave you." "You have to," Sarah insisted, her voice urgent. "Jedediah will be here any minute. He won't show me any mercy. But if you can get away with Tala, she deserves a chance." Kai looked at Tala, who was clinging to his leg, her eyes wide with fear. He knew Sarah was right. He couldn't risk Tala's life. "Go," Sarah repeated, pushing him towards the darkness. "Go now. He'll try to distract them. Give you some time." Kai nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He scooped Tala into his arms and turned to leave. "Kai," Sarah called out, her voice weak. He stopped and looked back at her. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For everything." Kai didn't say anything. He simply nodded again, then disappeared into the darkness, carrying Tala with him. Sarah watched them go, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and relief. She knew she was making a sacrifice, but she didn't regret it. She had given Kai and Tala a chance to escape Jedediah's grasp and find a better life. And that, she realized, was worth any price. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She knew Jedediah would be furious when he found Silas unconscious and Kai and Tala gone. He would likely kill her. But she couldn't think about that now. She had to focus on distracting him, giving Kai and Tala as much time as possible to escape. She stood up, her shoulder throbbing with pain. She walked out into the open, into the fading light of the setting sun. She waited, knowing that Jedediah would be here soon. And when he came, she would be ready. She would face him with courage, with defiance, with the unwavering belief that she had done the right thing. She had given Kai and Tala a chance, and that was all that mattered. The desert wind whispered around her, a silent witness to her bravery. She was alone, wounded, and facing certain death. But she was also free. Free from debt, free from fear, free to choose her own destiny, even if that destiny was death. She had found her redemption in the heart of the wild. The thunder of hooves pulled Sarah from her reverie. Jedediah and his men crested the rise, their shadows long and menacing in the dying light. He dismounted, his face a mask of fury. "Where are they, woman?" He snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "Where did you send them?" Sarah met his gaze, unflinching. "They're gone, Jedediah. Gone where you'll never find them." He backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling to the ground. The pain was searing, but she refused to cry out. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "You lying bitch," he spat. "You think you can defy me? You think you can protect them?" He drew his pistol, aiming it at her head. "I should have known you were nothing but trouble. Just like your husband." Sarah closed her eyes, bracing for the end. But the shot never came. Instead, she heard a shout, a familiar voice cutting through the silence. "Jedediah, let her go." Sarah's eyes flew open. Standing at the edge of the canyon, framed against the fiery sunset, was Cowboy. He held his rifle steady, his face a mask of grim determination. Tala was nowhere in sight. Jedediah's eyes narrowed. Well, well, well. Look who decided to come back. I thought you were running scared." Kai didn't flinch. "I came back for her, Jedediah, and am not leaving without her." "You're a fool, Kai. Jedediah sneered. You can't possibly think you can take on all of us. Maybe not, Kai replied, his voice calm and steady, but I'm willing to die trying. He raised his rifle, taking aim. The air crackled with tension. Sarah knew this was it, the final showdown. You're making a mistake, Kai, Jedediah said, his voice losing some of its bravado. Just walk away. Let me have the woman. It doesn't have to end like this. Kai's eyes hardened. It already has, Jedediah. The moment you decided to prey on a widow and her child. He squeezed the trigger. The canyon erupted in gunfire once more. The battle for redemption had begun. Kai moved with a deadly grace, picking off Jedediah's men one by one. Sarah watched in awe, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. He was fighting for her, risking his life to save her. She had never known such courage, such loyalty. Jedediah, enraged, charged towards Kai, firing wildly. Kai dodged the bullets, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The two men circled each other, their eyes locked in a deadly dance. Then, Jedediah made a mistake. He lunged forward, trying to disarm Kai. But Kai was too quick. He sidestepped the attack, then brought the butt of his rifle crashing down on Jedediah's head. Jedediah crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The remaining men, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. Kai seized the opportunity, firing a warning shot into the air. Leave now, he commanded, his voice ringing with authority, or you'll end up just like him. The men didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled onto their horses and rode off into the darkness, leaving Jedediah lying in the dirt. Kai turned to Sarah, his face etched with concern. Are you all right? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she whispered. Thanks to you. He helped her to her feet, his touch gentle. Kai helped Sarah back to the makeshift camp, tending to her shoulder wound with practiced care. He cleaned it with whiskey, the sting making her gasp, but she bit back the pain. He bound it tight with a clean strip of cloth, torn from his own shirt. We need to get you to a doctor, he said, his voice low. Redemption isn't far, but Jedediah has friends there, Sarah finished, understanding dawning. He won't just let this go. Kai nodded grimly. He controls a lot of the town. Pays well, expects loyalty. The silence hung heavy between them. Sarah knew he was right. Going to redemption was walking into a trap. But staying here, wounded and alone, wasn't much better. Tala? Sarah asked, her voice strained. Safe, Kai said, his eyes softening. Hidden where no one will find her. Not even Jedediah. He wouldn't elaborate, and Sarah didn't press him. She trusted him, more than she'd trusted anyone in a long time. The next morning, Kai helped her onto his horse. The pain in her shoulder was a constant throb, but she held on tight. They rode slowly, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the shadows of the hills. As they neared redemption, they saw them a small posse, led by a man Sarah recognized as Deputy Clegg, a man who'd always seemed fair, if a little weak. Hold up, Clegg called, raising his hand. We need to talk, Kai. Kai reined in the horse, his hand resting on his rifle. About what, Clegg? Jedediah saying you shot him and his men in cold blood, Clegg said, his voice hesitant. Says you kidnapped Sarah here. Sarah found her voice, despite the pain. That's a lie, Clegg. Jedediah was selling me off to pay my husband's debts. Kai saved me. He saved Tala. Clegg looked from Sarah to Kai, his face troubled. Had known Jedediah for years, respected him, but had also seen the man's darker side, the way he squeezed every last penny out of the townsfolk. Jedediah also didn't mention Silas's lying unconscious back in that canyon, Kai added, his voice hard. Maybe you should ask yourself why. A flicker of doubt crossed Clegg's face. I need to hear Jedediah's side of the story. Then go find him, Sarah challenged. See for yourself what kind of man he is. See if he tells you the truth about the debt, about Tala, about everything. Clegg hesitated, then nodded. All right. I'll hear him out. But I'm taking you both into town. For your own safety. Kai didn't argue. He knew they had no choice. As they rode into Redemption, Sarah felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But maybe, just maybe, the truth had a fighting chance. The jail cell was small, the air thick with dust and stale beer. Sarah sat on the cot, her shoulder throbbing, listening to the sounds of redemption. The murmur of voices, the clatter of dishes from the saloon, the distant barking of a dog. Life going on, even after everything that had happened. Later that evening, Clegg came to the cell. His face was weary, his eyes troubled. Jedediah's awake, he said, his voice low. He's telling a different story. Says you and Kai ambushed him, tried to rob him. Sarah shook her head. He's lying, Clegg. You know he is. Ask around. See what people really think of him. Clegg sighed. I am asking around, Sarah. And people are scared. They owe Jedediah money, favors. They're not going to speak against him. Then look at the facts, Sarah pleaded. Silas is still out there. Go find him. Talk to him. Clegg hesitated, then nodded. All right. I'll talk to Silas. But if he confirms Jedediah's story, then you'll know him lying, Sarah finished. But him not. Kai isn't. Jedediah is the one who's been preying on this town for years. Clegg left, the iron door clanging shut behind him. Sarah was alone again, with her thoughts and her fears. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she knew she had to keep fighting, for Kai, for Tala, for herself, for the chance to build a better life free from Jedediah's grasp. The next day dawned bright and clear. Sarah could hear the sounds of the town stir into life. She wondered what Kai was doing, where Tala was hidden. She hoped they were safe. Later that morning, Clegg returned. His face was grave. I talked to Silas, he said, his voice flat. He confirmed Jedediah's story. Said you and Kai attacked him. Sarah's heart sank. She knew Jedediah had gotten to Silas, threatened him, paid him off. But she refused to give up. He's lying, Clegg, she said, her voice firm. You have to believe me. Jedediah is the one who's been running this town into the ground. Clegg looked at her, his eyes searching. He wanted to believe her. Had always had a soft spot for Sarah, for her quiet strength and her unwavering spirit. But the evidence was against her. I want to believe you, Sarah, he said, his voice weary. But I can't ignore the facts. I'm going to have to charge you and Kai with assault and robbery. Sarah closed her eyes, a wave of despair washing over her. It was over. Jedediah had won it. Then she heard a commotion outside the jail. A shout, a scuffle, the sound of horses' hooves. She opened her eyes, her heart pounding. The door to the jail burst open, and Kai stood there, his rifle in his hand. Behind him stood a group of men, faces grim, rifles drawn. Let her go, Clegg, Kai said, his voice hard. It's over. Jedediah's been running this town for too long, and we're here to put an end to it. They had found Silas, and Silas Looking at the barrel of a gun told the truth. The truth spread like wildfire.